So hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us here today at this Gather Lightning Chat on journalism and accessibility, or inaccessibility, I should say. We are going to be joined today by two speakers. Jason Strother is our first speaker. Jason is an adjunct professor at Montclair State University here in New Jersey. He is a longtime journalist, and he is starting all kinds of activity, but including a company or a service around accessibility in journalism, particularly for folks with low vision or vision impairment. We're going to start today by speaking with Jason because he has kindly joined us from Korea, and it is 2 a.m. where he is. And so he has kindly joined us and agreed to stay up extra late past his bedtime. So we'll start briefly. Jason has a video that we're going to show, and I'm going to try to provide the, make sure the captions line up. But if you are unable to engage with the captions, I'm going to post a link in the chat right now that you can use. It's a linked transcript of the audio from this video. If you'd like to follow along, you can click that link and follow along on Otter as well. So before we begin, though, I'll just have Jason introduce himself and the video that we're going to be watching and listening to.
Sure, Joe. I'm more than happy to stay up late, Joe, to help you out with this. So thank you for inviting me onto this panel. And I'm not going to miss Jay's presentation after mine, so I will stay up a little later. I don't want to miss this. So as Joe said, I'm a journalist with well over 15 years of experience, graduated from Montclair State University in New Jersey back in '03. But wound up in Seoul, South Korea for much of the past 15 years. But last year, I moved back to New Jersey with the plan to start a news agency that focuses on the disability angle, finding a story, like approaching journalism, through the lens of disability and accessibility. So I named my company Lens 15 Media. So that's looking at the news and media through the lens of disability and accessibility for the 15% of the global population that has a disability. I come to this with my own lived experience. I have a low vision disability, legally blind, for whatever that nebulous term means. But I rely on assistive technology to pretty much do all of my reading. And that includes with journalism. And, I would not be able to access the news if it wasn't for text-to-speech programs, audio description, for all these other features that have only really come about because of the digital age. When I was younger, I had to use a magnifying glass to read the newspaper. I'm glad I don't have to do that anymore, because that really would cause a lot of headaches. So I think there's a lot that can be said about how to improve journalism to make it more accessible for people with low or no vision. And as Joe alluded to, I made a little video, kind of impromptu, so please excuse its roughness, just about some of the main considerations when it comes to visual accessibility and journalism, but really media in general. So Joe, if you are ready, please roll the tape.
I believe I am. And let me go ahead and screen share and do that very quickly here. Let's see. So I'm going to do screen one. Okay. Let me know if you all can see a black background, or if you see my Slack channel. This should be what you see right now. There we go. Okay. So here we go.
Okay, the first thing I want to discuss is screen accessibility. This is a concern for anyone who publishes online, especially because there are many litigious people with disabilities, and perhaps more so their lawyers. Just a little caveat here, I am only an end user. I don't know anything about coding or website design. There are plenty of professionals and other resources about how to make websites most accessible for people with low vision or no vision. But all I can give you is kind of a background about how people with visual impairments access the web. Many people with a vision impairment use adaptive technology, screen readers, to use their computers and navigate the web. Two of the big screen readers are JAWS, that is mostly for PC, Windows computers, and then there is Apple's VoiceOver utility. I use neither. Let me show you how I read content on the web. So here's an article from National Geographic that I was perusing recently. It's a long article with a lot of pictures, and as I scroll down, you can see that there are also many advertisements embedded into the body of the article. Now, basically, it's too small, so I have to zoom in this close just to read the headline of this section. But as you can see here, moving back and forth is not convenient at all. A little seasickness provoking. And on top of that, the background is so bright white to me, it really gives me a headache. So what I do is go back up to the top of the page and click on the screen reader view, which is a feature of all Safari browsers. And what that does is it just gives me the text with pictures, and it also flips the color from a white background to a dark background with white text, which is so much easier for me to tolerate. Then what I do using my keyboard, I highlight the text, and then I have a shortcut key to turn that text into speech.
Discover the beauty of all 63 U.S. national parks. From massive glaciers to sun-soaked beaches, national parks offer some of America's wildest and most iconic landscapes. Photographs by Jonathan Irish, by National Geographic staff. Published April 19, 2022. 35-minute read. When the U.S. Congress established Yellowstone.
Sorry if that's a little fast for you. I'm used to listening to this synthetic voice at a pretty quick speed. One drawback to using this text-to-speech utility is that it does not read alt descriptions or image descriptions. So I think you've probably heard about alt text. Many publishers are getting better about adding descriptions to images on their websites. Some do it better than others. There are basically two kinds of alt text. One type that seems to be most common are just basically tags. So maybe there's a picture and the text that has been input just says a valley. I would encourage editors to use more descriptive text. So, go beyond just saying that, this is a valley you're looking at, and really give details about the image. And that will help the screen reader user get a better idea of what the picture is, and help tell the story better too, I feel. So let's go back to that National Geographic article. And this is where I have a bone to pick with Apple. You can only access image descriptions on mobile devices. So here I've opened up that article on my iPad. And as you can see, again, a white background. So what I do is I toggle on an accessibility feature called Smart Invert that flips the color of the background to a dark background with white text, but it keeps the images in their natural color. And then if I want to read this article, again, reading it visually is not very easy for me. I turn on the screen reader mode. It gives me a full text body, and then with a hand gesture, two fingers swiping down on my screen, it will read it out loud.
Discover the beauty of all 63 U.S. national parks.
Again, this feature won't read alt text. So I go back to the standard viewing mode. I get out of the screen reader mode, and then I open back up my accessibility panel, and I turn on VoiceOver.
VoiceOver on. Safari.
And now I'm able to tap on a picture, and it will read me all of the text that some editor has embedded into this image.
A blue and orange glacier under a cloudy sky.
One other accessibility feature I want to talk about with you today is audio description. This is becoming more and more common, and maybe you've already heard it, perhaps by accident. I've spoken with customer service at Disney Plus who've told me that the biggest complaint they get is from customers saying, how do I turn off this disembodied voice that's describing everything on screen? For the uninitiated, audio description is a narration that describes action and visual imagery. It's increasingly found on movies and television shows. You can go to a movie theater and request a headset that will pick up a Bluetooth or radio frequency signal that carries the audio description track. And on all of the streaming platforms, there is a setting to activate English language audio description. I want to give you just a quick example of audio description in case you're not familiar with it. It is from the film Crip Camp, which is available on Netflix, and if you haven't seen it, you really should. I would describe it as must-see viewing for anyone who's interested in disability rights and accessibility. And as you can hear, the description starts off from the very start of this film.
A red letter N unfolds into a spectrum of colors.
An animated stairway appears, descending in pyramid shape to the words higher ground. Animated autumn leaves blow away, revealing a wheelchair. Rusted Spoke Productions. A portable videotape recorder.
Okay, that's the video in a nutshell. But what I want to pick up where I left off with the audio description, this is something that journalism has not utilized yet. Yes, PBS, out of GBH Boston makes a ton of documentaries, and they do in-house audio description. But I'm not aware of a single newscast or other kind of local news production that has found a way to utilize audio description. There are some time constraints about embedding a descriptive narration into a 3-minute television package, but no one's trying it either. So I'd be very curious to see ways that local news, especially television news, can embed on versions of their news packages or longer television features on their websites. There's an infinite number of space out there to make additional videos that include audio description. I mean, even now, I think YouTube is rolling out a system later this year, or maybe it has already, where any user can embed an extra audio track that can be activated as audio description. So this is a real pardon the term, a blind spot in journalism, is not making more video news content accessible using audio description. I can say, as a user of audio description, it has changed the way I consume media. I've only really started using it for the past, 3 or 4 years. And I pretty much won't watch anything without it. It really can bring me into a story much better, especially when we're talking about videos that have subtitling. I've only been able to watch a handful of non-English language movies in my life because I'm unable to read subtitles. But with audio description, that is read out as well as the descriptions of the action on screen. So I'd like to see more broadcasters find ways to incorporate audio description into their programming.
I mean, this is fascinating, and I appreciate the video. I didn't expect you to put together something so tight so quickly. That was very good. And I'd love to share that with not just the folks that I work with in New Jersey, but the rest of the Gather folks. I'm sure would love to see that. Sure. I mean, going back to your point about just the basic level of the lack of accessibility around even text-based platforms like Slack. For those of you who don't know, part of the conversation that we've been having on Slack, the irony baked into it is that Slack is a terrible program to use when it comes to voiceover narration for text. But part of the conversation we've been having is, there's just it's like a wall essentially, where you try to access information, whether it's local news like you're saying, or even a Netflix show, and you run into this wall where it's not built for you. It's not built with you in mind. And there are, I think you and I were talking the other week, Jason. There's something like I think 5 million, at least 5 million people in the United States alone who have some form of vision-based accessibility needs.
It depends on who you go by. The CDC will have it as a few million. The American Council for the Blind puts it more like 25 or 26 million. So it depends on how you classify the visual impairment. But the number one cause of vision loss is age, and many senior citizens who have lost their vision don't necessarily consider it as a disability, when in fact it is. It's just kind of seen as something that happens to you when you get old, that you go blind. But if you factor in those numbers, it becomes quite high, the number of people with visual impairments that could benefit from more accessibility features.
Now, I mean, because this is Gather, and we're all about community engagement here, I wanted to bring up an example that I saw sort of in the wild, that struck me, because there, many of us, I hope, are familiar with the social media website Reddit.com. If you're not, no big deal. But Reddit is a series of communities and sub-communities that is, meant for sharing links, articles, images, videos, audio. And there are people on Reddit. There is a community on Reddit who voluntarily goes around and does image descriptions and alt text for images that are posted that don't have that accompanying. And I'm wondering, especially as somebody who is trying to launch a company to specifically tackle some of these issues, I'm wondering what kind of opportunities you see or you've thought about for bringing the community into this process. People who either have the time or have the will to provide this sort of a service as a crowdsourcing kind of a thing. So on Reddit, like I said, there are roving crews of people who go around and make sure that images and videos have these types of descriptions on them. Talk about some of the ways that you're planning to address these issues and work with newsrooms to build this out, and how maybe you might think about bringing members of the community in to make this a more participatory and engaged process.
Sure thing, Joe. Right. Well, I mean, user-generated content and descriptions, or even audio description. There are many users making audio description and uploading videos to YouTube for videos that did not originally have audio description. That's all nice and good, but really adding alt text, adding descriptive text, and if we want to go down the road of audio description, adding description really needs to be done in-house. And that's something that, there is a lot of progress being made on this, especially when it comes to image descriptions. It's become very easy on social media platforms and other systems to input alt text and descriptive text. I mean, I was kind of tooling around with my kind of WordPress website the other day, and I thought it's so easy now just to put in those words. But it has to become part of the workflow protocol that however that gets delegated within a newsroom, whether it's the photo editor, the journalist, the producer, whoever has their hands on the piece last before it gets published, it just has to be part of the workflow. Now, of course, that's time is money, and now it's not a ridiculous amount of time required to insert a couple lines of descriptive text, but of course, for journalists, reporters, editors who already have their hands full, it's one more task, but it is important. And they are excluding a significant number of Americans from getting the full story by not including it. So that's what I hope to install in the minds of the powers that be in newsrooms, that this just has to be part of the publication protocol, to make sure that, and to go beyond just the image tags, to really have description, to really write out, not in lines that aren't longer than a tweet, really describing what the image is. And as I said in the video, it really helps tell this. It gives a fuller picture for the entire story if a visually impaired person knows what the image is all about.
Well, thank you. I want to thank you again. You're going to stay on. Please feel free to ask any additional questions in the chat. We're going to get to them at the end. I want to bring up our second guest here. Jason, I'm going to unspotlight you there real quick.
Go for it.
Our second guest is Dr. Jaipreet Virdi, which goes by Jay today. She's an award-winning historian whose research focuses on the ways that medicine and technology impact the lived experiences of disabled people. She's an educator. She's taught at Ryerson University, University of Toronto, Brock University. She is currently an assistant professor at the Department of History at the University of Delaware, where she teaches courses on disability histories, the history of medicine, health, and health activism. She also serves as the co-director of the Hagley Program in the History of Capitalism, Technology, and Culture. Born in Kuwait to sick parents, Virdi lost her hearing at age 4 to bacterial meningitis. And she's been working her ass off, it seems, since to address a lot of these issues that we're talking about today. Thank you, Dr. Virdi. Thank you for being with us today. Please introduce yourself and tell us some of the main issues and trends that you're noticing in these fields and how they might apply to journalism at any level. Thank you for joining us.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you, Joe, for having me here, and thank you, Jason, for giving me wonderful notes to follow up on. By way of audio description, by the way, I am a South Asian woman with shoulder-length curly dark hair. I'm wearing dark frame glasses, have a light colored blazer, and I'm currently zooming in from my home office in Newark, Delaware. So I'm clearly, a typical historian surrounded by books and plants. So I'm an historian of technology, science, medicine, disability, but most of my research centers on the issue of how disabled people work with technology. So how they adapt prosthetics, assistive devices to better enhance the lived experiences. So today I kind of want to talk a little bit about what the past 2 years have been in terms of surviving and working in a pandemic, when we're required to work from home and Zoom in for classes or meetings, etc. And what these kind of expectations for participation means in terms of putting up more barriers and how we can dismantle those barriers. So I think Jason wonderfully described the challenges of visual limitations for websites, for movies, etc. But one of the challenges I found also in terms of descriptions in closed captioning in film and other kind of entertainment don't always capture the breadth of auditory experience. So I can be watching a movie, I can turn on the closed captioning, and if there's like music playing, but I don't really know what the music is. Or there's clearly something going on if I'm watching some suspenseful scene, and I have to ask my partner about what's going on because apparently there's some auditory clue in the scene that is necessary for understanding the suspense. So these are barriers that I've dealt with my entire life. On top of watching something that doesn't have closed captioning. All of these issues became all the more problematic. In fact, they became compounded during the pandemic, where we had this whole shift online to technologies and platforms that weren't readily accessible. So all my classes, I teach 2 classes a semester to 70 students, all moved online, and I had to stop and say I could not follow the university guidelines for just having all my classes in Zoom, because at the start of 2020, Zoom didn't have closed captioning. It wasn't built in. So I couldn't really do that. And so I needed time to figure out what's the most accessible platform for me as an educator, but also me as a participant in society, and how did I want to engage, but also thinking ahead, at the start of 2020, not really knowing how long this pandemic would last and what it would mean for my career as an educator, as a researcher. So these were genuine worries. I spent a lot of time, free time, by the way, all unpaid time, working with different companies, working with universities, working with departments on accessibility to come up with guidelines for how to better improve access for deaf people, for people who are blind or with low vision, but also generally thinking how we can move away from what we've become accustomed in terms of having platforms for engagement, but also move away from these rigid guidelines to create more inclusive spaces. It just so happened around that same time, many of these major technology companies were also dealing with their own issues of inaccessibility and working with disabled communities to better enhance the platform and asking users for the input. So I, for example, gave input to Otter when you're reading the transcript from. And one of the suggestions I had was, well, you need to break up this conversation by people. I need to know who's talking. Like, it's not just enough to have a transcript of everybody who's speaking, but if I can't identify who's speaking, then it's not really a good transcript. So these minor changes help make the experience a little bit better. Also, what happened over the course of the pandemic is I had my first book out, and my book talks about the importance of rethinking cues in relation to deafness and how we can think about the ways in which technology better improve accessibility. And part of doing a book is also doing a lot of media promotion. And I had journalists reaching out to me to make comments about, not just about my book, but also about inaccessibility during a pandemic or work from home issue, or just general comments about public health during a time of a crisis. And for the most part, I had to create this conversation with a journalist before we even got to the interview about how we can proceed in doing this interview. Is it accessible for me? What provisions are in place? I had journalists who just like, can I jump on a call with you? And I had to remind them, you asking me for my input as a deaf person. You should realize I cannot hear on the phone. So like these were, issues I had to deal with. But it got kind of exhausting reminding journalists, you want a deaf perspective, you have to take into account there needs to be accommodation in there some way. I also work with different radio and podcasts to rethink how we can do an interview to make it more accessible, including bringing in ASL interpreters, pre-recording, having the file be captured for release. And one of the most frustrating things I experience is me and the producers of the show can do all of the work to make sure that the episode is accessible, ASL interpreters, captioning, description, alt text, all of that. And then we can post it online and celebrate how inclusive the specific episode is, but they never do it again for any other episode. So I find it ironic, like all this push for accessibility was only for the episode centered on accessibility, but never going forward for future episodes. Almost like you want to give yourself a pat in the back, but not do the real work after. And I think in journalism, I think we really need to rethink the way we not only do the interviews, or not only showcase subjects who are part of conversations about disability, accessibility, or even inaccessibility, but we need to stay committed to the guideline moving forward. Yeah. I think that's all I can think of right now. I'm sorry I didn't have a video prepared like Jason did.
Totally fine. That was fantastic. In fact, there's two things I want to ask you about. But before I do, I just want to note that I put in the chat for anyone who has questions. You can either drop your questions in the chat for either of our panelists. You can also simply raise your hand using the reactions feature, or if it's easier, you can turn your video on and just simply raise your hand. We have a whopping 3, maybe 4 people in here, so I will try to get to you in time. But Dr. Virdi, the two things you mentioned, one was the pandemic, and I'm immediately struck by my own frustrations, not of necessarily disability or accessibility, but even technological accessibility for people who have been forced to grapple with new technologies at various stages in their lives or careers that they may not be familiar with. And I'm wondering, how do you see the opportunities for using this as using the momentum around this to not only introduce people of all persuasions to new technologies, but to do so in a way that brings everyone along with and doesn't just focus on how to use Zoom, but how to use, like you were saying, a variety of technologies to make sure that not just that it's accessible at the bare minimum, but that it's welcoming and that it's inclusive in a way that goes beyond the bare minimums. The relationship between the pandemic and the technological needs there versus the underlying needs for accessibility more generally?
Yeah, one of the things that disabled activists have been saying since day one of the pandemic is this entire shift to work from home, or this entire shift towards how we rely on technology as a means for communication, not only opened up participation for many people who were previously being barred from that, but also they knew from day one, once everything starts, quote, going back to normal, these events are going to be slowly taken away. So that was the given. And part of the reason, you can make an argument about capitalism. Well, it costs too much money, or we don't really have the budget for that. But there's an ethical principle in here too, in that why does accessibility only matter when it benefits the majority of able-bodied people? So many able-bodied people benefited from these resources that disabled people prior to the pandemic had long fought for. I mean, I have had students who demanded and struggled to get Zoom access for the classes. And then suddenly everything is moved on Zoom or the hybrid components. I've had people talk about how they couldn't participate in international conferences because either they physically couldn't travel or the cost of travel itself was financially inaccessible. Now suddenly we have all these methods to create a much more flexible society. We're okay with showing up in our pajamas. We're okay with, being flexible with regards to people's time and space. But now we're going back to these rigid guidelines again for how we function in a society, and slowly things are starting to be rolled back. I mean, let me give you an example. One of the best captioning platform I discovered during the pandemic was Google Meet. The captioning was accurate. It worked better the more you used it. It was one of the first platforms to accurately spell out my name in captions, so which was quite an achievement in itself. But it was restricted to institutional accounts until halfway through 2021 or early 2021. I can't remember. It opened up Google Meet for everybody. Then I noticed that all the features that I had been using for the past 2 years were slowly being restricted, or you can only get it if you subscribe to the more expensive platform. And that was really troubling. It's like, well, we all benefited from this platform and now you're just taking it away. And it was really disappointing. But I think it speaks to how many people feel that the pandemic was a temporary affair, that all the resources and all the technological developments that emerged during that time were also temporary, and not really thinking about how to apply it forward to creating a much more just and inclusive society. And I think that we have to do something more. I don't have answers for that. I'm just a historian. I'm trained to look in the past, not the future.
Understandable. And then my second question stems from my sort of frantic panic over the last 12 hours to find a replacement ASL interpreter for today. And you said something sort of casually that as this is just one of those situations where, I'm learning, we're all trying to learn. You said, I'm not very familiar with ASL actually. And I mean, this is sort of I'm telling on myself here, but I guess I'd never even considered that wouldn't be a proper solution for everyone who may have hearing issues or is hard of hearing, excuse me. And even in my panic, I even tried to find, digital solutions, for instance, like the interactive, translation. So for ASL, where you can do something almost like Google Translate and the person will, do something like that. As you can see on my screen, hopefully I'm showing an app window of an animated character who's standing against a white background, and you can type in a phrase. And when you type in the phrase, the character does the sign language or the American Sign Language translation that is visible on the screen. And at first I was like, wow, this is amazing. And of course, I spoke to folks on the disability and accessibility channels on Slack and on our listserv, and they said, don't even bother, because number one, the apps are usually garbage. Language obviously is so much more than the simple words in translation. Can you talk, this is a long-winded way of asking, can you talk a little bit about some of the technological assistive technology that does work, that is useful, and the relationship between, or the I would say the assumptions that are underlying what people actually need versus what they may actually need.
Yeah, I mean, I think what you were doing in terms of creating an inclusive space is important. I mean, that should be recognized. Like, you're already trying to figure out, okay, how can I make there an accessible space for my guests, but also the audience, and thinking of creative ways. I mean, that takes a lot of the labor away from me. So I mean, like, I don't have to work with you in my already limited time to come up with best practices. I mean, the fact that you're already thinking about that is great. Yes, there should be standard guidelines for best practices that are posted somewhere where we can all kind of like reference to when we need this, need accessibility. But at the same time, it's also important, I think, to ask people. I mean, every time I give a talk, because I'm deaf, people assume naturally that I'm fluent in ASL. I'm not fluent in ASL. I don't communicate with it enough to be very fluent in it. But also, it's not the way I communicate as well. So I mean, I rely on people's faces and I lip read. In fact, Joe, most of the time you're talking, I'm not looking at the caption, I'm looking at your face, so I can lip read. Because that's how I communicate, outside the virtual world. But the point is really, like, we have to offer these options. We can't, at the same time, we can't just expect people who are coming to join this conversation to have their own resources. The fact that you came in, the captions are turned on, the transcript, wonderful. Like, it makes it easier for me. And it provides me with an alternative avenue in case the captions app that I do have on my own end, which are on my iPad, if they fail, which has happened many times. So when we think about how to create these events or meetings, interviews, etc., as inclusive as possible, I think everybody benefits from that. So it doesn't always have to be someone who's disabled or someone who has a visual or hearing impairment. It could just be somebody who's exhausted, or in a time zone different, like Jason is. And these extra avenues for accessibility makes the conversation a lot easier.
Yeah, we do have questions in the comment. I'm going to bring Jason back up on the stage here. Jason, you're spotlighted now, and I hear that too. And the thing that you said, extra, and I even now, even as somebody who is a novice in this, my brain went, well, they shouldn't be extra. It should be considered part of the basic accommodations for it. And so it has me thinking. You mentioned events as well. I mean, it's just, these are the kinds of things that, as someone who is not as familiar with this as I could be, I'm always looking, and I do appreciate I'm panicking. I'm neurotic, so I panicked and tried to have as many options as available. So I'm glad that they were sufficient. But yeah, and this is the kind of thing that I would say is an afterthought is being generous, if I were to say, in most newsrooms, especially local newsrooms. And, they're missing out on such a huge swath of the communities that they proclaim to serve. And so I want to go to a question here from Patrick Garvin, who's here. Patrick, it's a little long. Do you want to just unmute and I can spotlight you and you can ask it?
Yeah, that would be great. Hi, this is Patrick Garvin. I'm an adjunct instructor at the Missouri School of Journalism, and I'm a front-end developer, and I'm a accessibility specialist through the International Association of Accessibility Professionals. And I am so grateful for both of you for taking the time here. One of the things that I'm curious about is kind of my general question is what is going to be the tipping point, or what do we need to get journalists to care about this to the point that they would be willing to drive into the office to fix inaccessible content the way that we would interrupt a family meal to log on to change a fact error, or the way that we would be willing to delete a tweet. Last week, the New York Times misgendered actor Ezra Miller. They got a bunch of blowback. They got a bunch of complaints. They deleted the tweet. They apologized. They promised to do better. It was an act of transparency on the part of the New York Times. They had acknowledged that they had done something wrong. They didn't use the term microaggression, but definitely that is something that trans and non-binary people have said has been a microaggression. How then do we get journalists who do earnestly care about creating work that is inclusive and equitable? How do we get them to treat disability and accessibility with the same sense of urgency that they would delete a tweet that doesn't have alt text, or frantically scramble to add a podcast transcript to a podcast that didn't have a transcript? How do we get them to basically treat this as the house is on fire and you need to fix this now, rather than to say, oh, we need to do better later?
Having more people with disabilities in the newsroom. I think when you have a colleague who has a low vision impairment, or who is hard of hearing, or who may be on the autism spectrum, suddenly you're going to feel a lot more pressure if you're a journalist and you have used incorrect language, if you have forgotten image descriptions, if you have, somehow made your work inaccessible. You'll probably remember to do that, if you have a colleague, at the cubicle next to you, or however one works these days in an office, that you just become more aware of that. But of course, there have been systemic barriers to entry for people with disabilities getting into news media, but that perhaps is another story about accessibility.
Yeah, that's actually, that's a perfect answer. But I also want to add, we need to have that same kind of pushback whenever there's any kind of failures in this. I mean, I'm thinking about, for instance, the hypocrisy I saw on Twitter where people are like, we need to create more inclusive spaces, we need to add closed captioning, and then they're sharing and retweeting videos with no captioning at all. And it's like, well, you can say these things, but you actually have to apply in practice. Like, stop showing videos that are on closed captioning. That's a start. Don't have these videos go super viral if they're not captioned, and then add caption after the fact. I also think about one of my colleagues, S.E. Smith, observed that on their Twitter, they're seeing more and more alt text. Because now on Twitter, you can see when somebody has alt text, right? Which is great. I'm a couple of years too late, but it's there now. And they said that, well, I'm seeing more and more of this. And that's because now more people are trying to understand exactly what alt text is and how to use it. And now there's a very easy way to use alt text. Whereas before, it seemed to be complicated. It seemed to be like an unnecessary extra step if you want to prove that, you are an inclusive warrior or whatever. So I think offering these easy solutions are just one step. Having people in the newsroom, having people in the front end of program development is also a good way. I mean, I can even think of, if you want to share an image or video, before you click post, a pop-up showed up and said, hey, you're missing alt text, or you're missing caption, or this is racist, or whatever, you want to post it. Just an extra step before going in that direction. I don't know how well this would work because people are different, but the point is really about pushing back when we see accessibility failures, help people to recognize when a house is on fire.
Thank you.
Fantastic.
That actually leads into my next, and not final, but next question. I think for me, the frameworks that we see around diversity, equity, and inclusion, as a grouping, as an acronym, those three categories seem to encompass accessibility, especially in the inclusion category. But I'm more and more, feeling lately that we need a fourth letter. And I sort of glibly have this in a Medium post for Gather, that we need to move from a DEI to an IDEA, IDEA, so inclusion, diversity, equity, and accessibility, because personally, it just doesn't seem like the accessibility aspects of inclusion are highlighted or at the forefront enough so that they're considered at the level that I believe that they deserve. At the same time, I don't think it would be productive to be seen as trying to dilute the conversation or the importance around racial, gender, class, and other equity and inclusion efforts. How do you, and this is for Dr. Virdi to start, but Jason, I would love to hear from you as well. How do you see that conversation? And do you think that we need to expand that framework to more specifically acknowledge and call out the needs of accessibility and accommodations there?
Yeah, more and more people I see are trying to push idea, but also the reason they're doing this is to distinguish the difference between inclusion and accessibility. So, you know, accessibility can be you're providing the tool for participation. Inclusion is you're making space for that participation to occur. And off the top of my head, I can think of an example in when I was organizing a digital conference and we were trying to work out how to make the space you know, like provide captioning, because the platform that we were working with did not have in-house captioning. So the program developer made a suggestion, well, there may be people who need closed captioning, we're just like projected into Facebook. And my remark was like, oh, so basically it's the same thing as if we're having an event in a fancy building and you're saying, if you want accessibility, go to the pub down the line, right? Like, why can't we all be in the same room?
Right.
So I think like the framework of idea is a great one. It puts disability in its own category and acknowledges that accessibility issues can sometimes be separate from issues of diversity, inclusion, and equity, because there's an additional technical barrier in place that is not always addressed by the other category.
It also goes the other way as well. You can have closed captioning, but if your stories are all about white, cis, hetero men, that's not very inclusive. It's maybe accessible, but it's still just as exclusionary in that sense as well. Jason, did you want to add anything to that?
Right. I mean, I'm a little worried when we start getting into these little acronyms and all that, that we get too focused on these mottos and slogans than actually taking care of the problems at hand.
Touché.
But sure, right. And, and of course, this is not a zero-sum game, right? You know, that we talk about accessibility, that does not take away from the real needs of better representation for people who have are transgender or who are from other marginalized communities. We all kind of face similar systemic, whatever you want to call it, barriers to inclusion one way or another. But yeah, I think
also trans people with accessibility needs as well. So yeah, it's interdisciplinary.
Of course. Well, I mean, that's the thing with disability, is that it knows no boundaries. It's it's one of the only demographics that, it is the most diverse demographic. 25% of Americans, and you can become a member of the disabled community if you live long enough. So it's a super demographic. But where was I? It's getting late over here in Korea.
That's okay.
But no, but sure. But I think people with disabilities, just as people who have, who want to have more recognition for their gender identities, or African Americans want better inclusion and better representation, it has to start at the ground level. People with disabilities need to advocate for themselves, and push the agenda, whether it's to make media more accessible, make social media more accessible. It has to come from the groundswell of advocacy from the disabled community.
Right. Yeah, and that's really pretty much what I was getting at. I think I definitely hear your intent to focus on solving the problem, as opposed to simply making it more visible or more prominent, I should say. I agree. I don't think we have to do one or the other. I think they are not mutually exclusive. I think in so many of the conversations that I've had, it seems like we're still in many ways at that initial stage where people have to be, including myself, are reminded or learn new things every day that seem like obvious things to certain people, but then are just sort of mind-blowing to others who may not even have considered that. And so I've seen a lot of conversations around this idea framework as in conjunction with the DEI. So I had to get that in there. I wanted to get your thoughts on that. We're running up on the edge of time, and I want to be respectful of everyone's hour here. I'll just leave with this. If both of you, starting with Jason, if you could if you could leave us with something going forward, a thought or a call to action, something that leaving this, you would want someone to go out and do, or to think more about, more deeply about, in about a minute or less or two. Give us something to walk away with. And then at the end, please tell us where we can follow your work or find out more from you or contact you.
Sure thing. Have conversations with people with disabilities. You probably know someone. They're in your family, they're in your office, they're your your cousins, they're your grandparents. Like I said, 25% of Americans have some form of physical, sensory, or intellectual disability. Find out what their needs are. Learn from them. Ask them about what would make, let's say in the terms of media consumption, what would make that easier for them? What would enable them to consume media or have a better qualitative experience consuming media and journalism? And I think that's a good way to start for everyone, to start understanding, how to make a difference, to make journalism more accessible. And
where can we follow your work or find more about what you're doing?
Sure. Not a big social media user. Lens15.com is one way, or look me up on LinkedIn. I'm posting there more than I think other platforms.
And Dr. Virdi, one thing you'd like us to come away with from this conversation with or do, and then please tell us how we can find or access the work that you do.
So I think the big takeaway is whenever we design something, whether it is a new tech app or a new program or classes, etc., we need to design them with accessibility at the forefront, not as an afterthought. We can't just add accessibility when we feel like we fallen short. It's important to design in the beginning because we ensure that we're already thinking about how to expand our area of participation. You can find my writing, my posts, my scheduled talks, etc., all on my website, jaivirdi.com. That's JAIVIRDI.com. I'm also on Twitter at JaiVirdi, where I just say a whole bunch of mundane things for no reason. But I'm a big social media person, so you will find me across different platforms.
Well, thank you so much. Andrew, would you like to close us out or say any closing words? You're welcome to.
Well, I really appreciate this, that this is a beginning of a conversation, and I'm sure this is in the middle because all the conversations you've had in the past. But I'm really excited about the possibilities of really continuing this, and the symposium that you're proposing. I'm in, Joe, so let us know how we can support and help.
Fantastic. Well, thank you all so much
for your time.
Thank you to our wonderful panelists today. We will be posting the recording. I will send this to Andrew, and please go to letsgather.in to learn more about the work that Gather does. And I believe we have we have lightning chats every month now, at least once every month. So be sure to check that out. Thank you again to all who are watching or joined us live. We'll talk to you soon. Thank you so much.